Welcome back to State of Valor. The kennels at the end of the corridor were different from the others. Reinforced steel instead of chain link. Double locks. Warning signs posted at eye level. Dangerous animal. Authorized personnel only. Do not approach. Inside the last kennel, Thor paced like a caged storm. 110 pounds of solid muscle, jet-black German shepherd with scars visible beneath his thick coat. His eyes tracked every movement with predatory focus. When footsteps approached, his lips curled back, revealing teeth trained to protect, to attack, to kill when necessary. The staff avoided that kennel when possible. Thor had been at the rehabilitation center for 8 months. In that time, he'd sent 3 experienced trainers to the hospital and showed 0 progress toward rehabilitation. The center's director had made the recommendation 3 times already. Thor was unadoptable, a liability consuming resources better spent on dogs who actually had a chance. That morning, Captain Emily Carter walked through the center's front entrance for the first time. She moved with careful precision, her white cane sweeping in controlled arcs, her free hand trailing along the wall. She wore jeans and a fitted jacket, her dark hair pulled back. Nothing about her appearance advertised her military service, except the bearing, shoulders back, spine straight, chin level despite the darkness that had become her constant companion. The intake coordinator, Jessica, greeted her warmly. "Captain Carter, welcome." "Just Emily, please." Emily offered a small smile. "The rank feels like it belonged to someone else." "You're looking for a guard dog?" "A service dog trained for mobility assistance. The VA recommended your facility because of your experience with military working dogs." Jessica's file told a story that didn't fit the composed woman before her. Captain Emily Carter, United States Army, 3 combat deployments, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart. The summary was devastating. Traumatic injury from IED explosion, complete bilateral vision loss, PTSD diagnosis, honorable discharge. "We have several excellent candidates," began Jessica. "Let me—" A bark, deep, aggressive, territorial, echoed from the back corridor, then sustained snarling that made Jessica flinch. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "That's just a dog in isolation. Let me show you—" "What's his story?" Emily asked quietly. "He's not part of the adoption program. Thor is a former military working dog, but he's been deemed unsuitable for placement." Emily turned her head toward the sound with eerie accuracy. "Military working dog. What branch?"
"Army, like you. Multiple deployments, explosives detection, patrol work. He was exceptional in the field." "Was?" Jessica's voice softened. "He lost his handler during an ambush. His handler was killed, and Thor hasn't been the same since. He won't bond with anyone. He's aggressive, unpredictable." The barking had stopped. The corridor had gone quiet except for pacing, claws clicking on concrete in endless, agitated rhythm. "I'd like to meet him," Emily said. "Emily, I don't think that's a good idea. Thor is dangerous. Even our most experienced handlers won't go in without backup. For someone who can't—" Jessica caught herself. "For someone who can't see him coming?" Emily finished gently but firmly. "I spent 3 years leading night operations in hostile territory. I learned to read threats by sound, smell, the feeling in the air when danger was close. I may not have my eyes, but I haven't forgotten how to read a situation." Jessica looked uncertain, torn between protocol and the quiet authority in Emily's voice. "Please," Emily added, "just to stand outside, to listen." 5 minutes later, Emily stood before Thor's kennel. Jessica stood beside her, tense and ready to intervene. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Thor launched himself at the gate with force that rattled the reinforced steel. His bark was deafening, full of fury and warning, and something else Emily recognized from her own nightmares. Fear. Jessica grabbed Emily's arm. "We should go." "He's not angry," Emily said quietly. "He's protecting himself." Thor hit the gate again, snarling, his body coiled with aggression that had nowhere to go. Staff members appeared at the corridor's end, hands on radios. Emily took a slow breath and spoke, her voice cutting through the chaos, without rising in volume. "Stand down, soldier." The command wasn't loud, but it carried authority earned through combat leadership. Military tone, clear, certain, familiar. Thor froze mid-lunge, his ears swiveled forward, the snarling cut off abruptly. Emily took one careful step closer. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small patch of fabric, worn, faded, stained with desert dust. A piece of her combat uniform from the night the IED exploded, the night her world went dark. She held it forward in her open palm. Thor's nose worked the air. His body was still tense, but the aggression shifted to confusion, recognition. He moved closer to the gate, sniffing deeply. The scent told him stories Emily could never speak aloud. Gunpowder, sand, sweat, fear, blood. The unmistakable signature of combat, of bonds forged under fire. "You know what it's like, don't you?" Emily said softly. "You were there, you did the job, and then something happened you couldn't control, couldn't prevent, couldn't fix. And everyone looks at you differently now, like you're broken, like you're dangerous." Thor's ears flattened, not in aggression, but in understanding. A low whine escaped his throat, the first sound the staff had heard from him that wasn't a growl. "I know you lost someone," Emily continued, tears tracking down her cheeks. "I lost people too, my squad, friends who became family. I lost my sight, my career, my purpose. So I know what it feels like to be locked in a cage, even when the cage is just the darkness inside your own head." Jessica stood frozen, watching something she'd never seen. Thor had moved to the gate's edge, his nose pressed against the steel mesh, his eyes fixed on Emily with intensity that had nothing to do with aggression. "I'm not here to fix you," Emily said. "I'm just here because I understand, because pain recognizes pain, because warriors know other warriors, even in the dark." She moved her hand slowly toward the gate, palm open. Thor could have bitten her easily through the mesh. Instead, he pressed his muzzle against her palm through the barrier. The contact sent a shudder through Emily's body. Through her fingertips she felt his warmth, the trembling that ran through his frame, the same wounded determination she saw in her own mirror every morning. "There you are," Emily whispered. "There's the soldier, still fighting, still loyal, still here." Thor lowered himself to the ground and rolled partially onto his side, exposing his vulnerable belly. Submission, trust, the ultimate gesture from a dog who'd trusted no one for 8 months. The center's director, Dr. Marcus Reynolds, appeared at the corridor's end, his expression thunderous. "What the hell is going on? Who authorized contact with Thor?" He stopped short when he saw the scene. Emily at the gate, hand extended. Thor on his side, whining softly, eyes locked on the blind woman who'd somehow reached him when dozens of professionals had failed. "Captain Carter, please step away. Thor is extremely dangerous." "He's extremely traumatized," Emily corrected quietly. "There's a difference. You don't have the training or certification to... Neither does he anymore. That's the problem. He was trained for war, for loyalty, for protecting his handler with his life. And when his handler died, all that training, all that loyalty, it had nowhere to go. So it turned inward, became fear, became the only way he knew to protect himself from more loss." Dr. Reynolds exhaled slowly.
Emily couldn't see his expression, but she heard the shift in his breathing. "I'm not leaving him," Emily said simply. "He needs someone who understands that being broken isn't the same as being finished." The director looked at Thor, who'd never shown submission to anyone since arriving. He looked at Emily, standing straight and certain despite her darkness. "1 week," he said finally. "Supervised sessions only. Any sign of aggression, we pull the plug immediately." "Understood," Emily agreed. What he didn't say, what Emily heard anyway, was that 1 week was all Thor had left before the final recommendation would be approved. The session started the next day in a secure outdoor training area. Thor wore a muzzle and reinforced harness with 2 handlers maintaining control. Emily stood in the center, listening. She heard Thor's agitated breathing, the handler's nervous shuffling. "Release him," Emily said. "Ma'am, protocol requires—" "I know what protocol requires. Thor needs to make a choice. Let him decide whether to trust me. Keeping him restrained just reinforces that the world is full of threats." After a long moment, Dr. Reynolds's voice crackled over the speaker. "Remove the muzzle, keep the leads attached, but give him slack." The muzzle came off. Thor's lips pulled back in a snarl. Emily sat down on the ground. The simple action defused the moment. Sitting, she was small, non-threatening, vulnerable. She held the old uniform patch loosely, letting the breeze carry the scent. "I'm going to tell you a story, Thor, about the night I lost my sight." She talked about the patrol, the intelligence that said the route was clear, the moment her point man triggered the pressure plate, the flash and force, waking up in a field hospital with bandages where her eyes used to be, the months of rehabilitation, learning to navigate permanent darkness. She talked about the anger, the grief, the days when getting out of bed felt impossible. Through it all, Thor listened. His snarling faded. His body slowly relaxed. He moved closer, incrementally, until he sat just feet from Emily. "I was angry at everyone," Emily continued, "but mostly at myself, for missing the IED, for not being strong enough to handle the aftermath, for not being the soldier I used to be." She paused. "But here's what I learned, Thor. Being strong doesn't mean never breaking. It means finding a reason to put yourself back together, even when all the pieces don't fit anymore." Thor moved the final distance and placed his head in her lap. The handlers gasped. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward, hardly believing what he was seeing. The most dangerous dog in the facility was voluntarily seeking comfort from a blind veteran he'd met yesterday. Emily's hand found Thor's head, her fingers sinking into his thick fur. She felt the scars there, marks where shrapnel or bullets had left their signature. Her other hand found more scars along his side. "Good boy," she whispered. "You don't have to fight anymore, not with me." Thor's body shuddered, and then the massive war dog began to cry. Not whining, but truly crying, making sounds of grief and loss that tore at everyone listening. He pressed against Emily, and she wrapped her arms around him. 2 broken soldiers, finally finding someone who understood. The week became 2 weeks, then a month. Emily came every day. Thor learned to guide her through obstacle courses, his body positioning naturally to help her navigate. When Emily stumbled, Thor was there, solid and steady. But more than technical skills, they learned each other's language. Emily could tell from the tension in Thor's body when loud noises triggered his combat memories. Thor could sense when Emily's breathing changed, when the darkness pressed too heavy. 3 months after their first meeting, the fire changed everything. It started in the facility's storage wing, faulty wiring that had needed repairs for years. By the time smoke detectors sounded, flames had already spread through back corridors. Emily was in a training room with Thor when alarms erupted. Staff began evacuating. Jessica appeared in the doorway, shouting over sirens, "Emily, we need to go! Fire in the West Wing!" Emily stood, reaching for Thor's harness, but Thor had gone rigid. His nose worked the air, processing information Emily couldn't access. Then he bolted toward the door, not toward the main exit, but toward the back corridor, toward the kennels. "Thor, no!" Jessica screamed, but the dog was already gone, disappearing into the smoke. Emily didn't hesitate. In combat, you didn't leave people behind, and Thor wasn't just a dog, he was her partner. "Emily, you can't!" Jessica grabbed her arm, but Emily pulled free. "He's going for the other dogs, the ones still in kennels. I'm not leaving him." She moved into the corridor, and the world became chaos. Smoke burned her throat and lungs. Heat pressed against her skin. Without sight, Emily had only sound and touch, and the distant sound of Thor barking, urgent and commanding. She followed his voice through the maze, one hand trailing the wall. Twice she nearly fell over debris. Once her shoulder hit a door frame hard enough to send pain shooting down her arm. But she kept moving, kept following Thor's bark. She found him in the kennel corridor. Through the smoke, Emily heard what Thor was doing. He'd somehow opened kennel doors, pawing at latches, using his weight, and was herding terrified dogs toward the emergency exit. "Thor!" Emily called, her voice raw from smoke. "Here, boy!" His bark changed direction. Suddenly he was at her side, his body solid against her leg. But he didn't try to lead her out. Instead, he pushed her hand towards something, another kennel latch, a dog inside whimpering with terror. Emily understood. Thor wasn't leaving until every dog was out. Together, they worked through the remaining kennels. Thor led her to each one. Emily's fingers found latches and releases. One by one, dogs flooded into the corridor, following Thor's commanding bark toward the exit. The ceiling beam fell without warning, a crack of splintering wood and a rush of heat. Emily felt Thor slam into her side, his weight driving her backward. She hit the wall hard, breath knocked from her lungs. Then she heard Thor whimpering, not emotional whimper, but the sharp, pained sound of injury. "Thor?" Her hands found him, felt the warmth spreading from his shoulder where the beam had caught him. "Thor, talk to me." He whined, but then his teeth gently closed around her sleeve, tugging, insisting. They had to move. Emily didn't know how she got them both out. Later, firefighters would piece together their path through the burning building, but somehow Emily emerged from the smoke into the parking lot, Thor limping beside her, both collapsing onto the pavement as medical personnel rushed forward. The burn on Thor's shoulder required treatment but wasn't serious. What mattered, what everyone couldn't stop talking about, was that the dog deemed too dangerous had just saved not only his partner, but 6 other dogs who would have died in their kennels. Dr. Reynolds stood over Emily and Thor as paramedics checked their vitals. "I'm adopting him," Emily said, her voice hoarse but certain. "I don't care what paperwork needs to happen. Thor and I are a team now." "I know," Dr. Reynolds said quietly. "I signed the adoption papers this morning, before the fire. That dog isn't broken, Captain Carter. He never was. He just needed someone who spoke his language."
6 months later, Emily and Thor stood on a stage at a military appreciation ceremony. Emily wore her dress uniform, medals displayed across her chest. Thor sat beside her in a custom service vest, his bearing proud and alert. The master of ceremonies, a retired general, addressed the crowd of veterans, active service members, and civilians. "Captain Emily Carter and Thor represent the very best of what service means," he said. "Not just the courage to face enemy fire, but the courage to face the battles that come after. The battles with injury, with loss, with the question of who we are when we can't be who we were. Emily and Thor found each other not in spite of their wounds, but because of them. They proved that sometimes the most broken among us are the ones most capable of helping others heal. The crowd rose in standing ovation. Emily felt the weight of their respect, and she felt Thor shift beside her, his body pressing against her leg. "I'm here. You're not alone." After the ceremony, a young female soldier approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you. I've been struggling since I came back. PTSD. And seeing you and Thor, knowing you both found a way forward, it gives me hope." Emily found the soldier's hand, squeezed it gently. The way forward isn't always clear. Sometimes it's dark and confusing and feels impossible. But you don't have to walk it alone. Find your Thor, whatever form that takes. Find the one who understands without words, who's been in the darkness too. That's where healing starts. That night, in Emily's apartment, Thor lay beside her as he did every night. His eyes stayed open until he heard her breathing even out. Only then did he allow himself to rest, knowing his new mission, keeping this warrior safe, helping her navigate a world she couldn't see, was as important as any combat operation he'd ever run. Emily reached down in the darkness, her hand finding Thor's head. "Who rescued who?" she whispered, the question she'd asked herself 100 times. She still didn't have an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the deepest healing came not from being saved, but from the shared act of surviving together. From two broken warriors deciding that broken didn't mean finished, that scars were proof of battles survived, that the mission continued even when the battlefield changed. Thor's tail thumped softly, his way of saying what words never could. "I'm here. You're here. We made it. Together." And in the darkness that had once felt like a prison, Emily finally felt something she hadn't experienced since the night the IED exploded. Peace. If this story moved you, if Emily and Thor's journey reminded you that healing is possible, that broken doesn't mean finished, that warriors find strength in understanding each other,
pain, then subscribe to State of Valor. Because these stories matter. Because every warrior deserves to know they're not fighting alone. Because the bonds forged in shared struggle are the ones that help us survive. Remember, courage isn't never falling down. It's reaching out when you're in the darkness, trusting that someone else in that darkness will reach back. It's finding purpose in the aftermath of loss. It's proving that the end of one mission is just the beginning of another. That's what heroes do. That's what Emily and Thor showed us. That's the legacy every warrior carries. The knowledge that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to save each other. That's the State of Valor. That's who we honor. That's why their stories will never be forgotten.